What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Absolute Batman, and this is issue number 2. So there's still a lot of world building that's going on here, but the ending of this is amazing. It's one of the coolest things that you're going to see. So what we do here is we pick up yet again with the monologue of Alfred. Now, as always, if you need to get caught up, you will find a link to the playlist at the end of this video. But Alfred is not your traditional butler. Alfred's actually a military guy, really kind of like a spy type dude, like a mercenary, who's on assignment in Gotham when he happened to come across Batman. And so what he says is that over the next 2 weeks following the events of the first issue, the party animals escalate their offensive on Gotham, and in return, Batman escalates his offensive on them. Now, of course, the party animals are kind of like this rogue faction that's risen to prominence in Gotham, but nobody really quite knows what they want. But we'll get some answers to those questions as we get further through this. When we come across like Absolute Riddler and Absolute, Harvey Dent, Two-Face, before they become the villains that they will inevitably become. But Alfred says he isn't everywhere, but he seems to know where their biggest attacks will be, and he meets them head on, like tonight at the aquarium. Now, one of the coolest things about this is that Absolute Batman is very similar to like Matt Reeves' Batman, right? He's unrefined, he's unpolished, he's not this prodigious fighter, he's not the greatest detective to ever live. He's literally a guy who's just kind of figuring it out and is just turned to vigilantism. So it's very much seemingly in the early days of his whole career. And truthfully, I love that, right? As much as I love the refined Batman who's like capable of 100 different fighting styles at one time and who can like solve every mystery like that, I do love having a Batman that is unrefined and is unpolished and doesn't really know exactly what he's doing. But Alfred also says he is incredibly capable and intelligent, because one of the things that goes on here is that in this fight, he talks about how Batman's clearly studied things like the art of war, right? That if you understand a battlefield, then you use the terrain to your advantage. And so as he's going against the party animals in this aquarium, that initially they seem to have the upper hand on him, right? That like, he has to come down eventually from the ceiling and they're in the water waiting on him. And so he takes a concentrated vinegar tablet, throws it into the water, and turns it into hydrochloric acid, which basically sends the party animals running out of the aquarium. And of course, they're arrested by the cops. But what Alfred also says is that Batman has these stash houses all over the city. So clearly he's not operating in the same Batman capacity that we're familiar with, right? Just a giant cave under Wayne Manor with like all kinds of crazy tech gadgets, right? These $50,000 Facebook machines and so on, right? Just like these crazy devices. Instead, he really is almost kind of like a bootleg Batman, right? Because what Alfred says is he has not been able to pinpoint every single stash house Batman has, but he has been able to find most of them. And he says from his movement, he's plotted a line where the others might likely be located. And if anything, he's certainly committed to the bit, because what Alfred realizes is that in analyzing Gotham City and in analyzing these safe houses, they form a bat. So Batman's nothing else if not consistent and committed to this whole thing. But Alfred in turn gives us a little more perspective about what Bruce Wayne kind of gets up to outside of just like facing off against these criminals, the party animals and so on. He says when he's not the Bat, his routine is monastically tight. He goes to work, then vanishes into the shadows. There's a rumor he meets with the Red Hood, a suspected resistance group, but the truth is, he's a man alone. He even steers clear of his mother these days. He breaks from routine only once during these weeks to make a stop that catches me off guard, to visit Joe Chill, his father's killer. Now again, one of the things that was kind of covered in the first issue, but I imagine it'll probably be explored either in the next issue or the issue after, is the zoo, right? Because the idea was that Bruce Wayne, as most of you guys have noticed, is not like the super rich billionaire who comes from like a wildly capable family and all that kind of stuff. His mom was a social worker, his dad was a teacher, right? That he comes from like very modest means. And so he doesn't have all the money in the world to spend on all the most crazy advanced, technology and so on. But at the end of the day, the very core of Batman still remains the same. That while his father and mother were not killed in Crime Alley, his father was killed in a zoo. That his father was killed trying to protect kids, which is basically kind of falling in line with the philanthropic nature of Thomas Wayne as he's usually depicted within DC Comics. So a lot of these elements, right, a lot of the familiarity of Batman is still there. It's just reimagined. And one of the best ways ever, right? It's just, oh God, I love Absolute Batman. One of you guys made a really good point in saying that what makes Absolute Batman so good is that it's the perfect way to reimagine Batman in the modern era. But getting back into the story, one of the things Alfred talks about is the nature of Batman and his limitations, because seemingly Batman is just one long advance forward, and it can't necessarily work that way, not with any real measure of longevity. He says, another week in, my handler tells me I have to drop protections from Batman. They say he's become too volatile a factor, right? Because while Alfred is monitoring Batman and while he was sent on a mission to really deal more with like the party animals than anything else, but Batman's kind of beating him to the punch, he's almost kind of like this hidden benefactor, right? He's just sort of like, you know, I put little things in place that basically help keep Batman safe, even though he doesn't fully know it. And that's what he talks about here. He says, his provocations have helped me form a new theory on who Sionis is, what he's a part of. I think about making my case, Sionis, of course, being the leader of the party animals. And Alfred says, instead, I removed the protections. Soon after, the party animals find his caves in the empty high-rise, just like I did. And that's what he kind of muses here, right? That when it comes to sort of any kind of military campaign, advance forward, rest and relaxation, because people need to rest, right? People cannot do a forward advance forever, right? I mean, eventually they will get tired, they'll be worn out, they won't be able to fight effectively. But what ends up happening is that when Alfred removes these things and when the party animals go after Batman, at the end of the day, it makes no difference. Batman keeps going anyway. And that's when Alfred realizes maybe that's all Batman really is, right? Just one gigantic advance forward, right? He never stops fighting no matter what, which means this guy's will is beyond anything that Alfred has ever seen in his life. And so at that point, you switch over to Jim Gordon. Now, we don't get a whole lot here, but we do get some pretty cool little tidbits that are absolutely worth covering within this story. And what ends up happening is that when Jim Gordon meets with Harvey Bullock and when he meets with like his daughter, right, Barbara, then initially they're just kind of having this little bit of a conversation where they're talking about actually like going after Batman. Now, at the moment, Jim Gordon is mayor of Gotham City, but the reality here is that the arrival of the party animals really seems to be what's disrupting his mayorship. Now, we'll talk about how that's not necessarily the case. That'll come from Harvey Dent here in a little while. But the reality is that the arrival of the party animals haven't done him many favors. Crime's higher than it's ever been. And it's one of the things that former Mayor Hill talks about here, right? That in the rise in crime, people have lost faith in the police. And so instead, they turn to a criminal to deal with crime, right? Of course, referring to Batman here. And that's why the Gotham City Police Department is putting their efforts in trying to capture Batman, right? Now, that's not new. Gotham City Police Department has been after Batman for years and years and years, no matter what universe you're in DC Comics. They're almost always trying to capture that guy. But what ends up happening is actually Martha Wayne shows up here. Now, this is one of the cool things, because remember, Martha was never killed, right? And that's one of the conversations that goes on between her and Jim Gordon, where they're just really old friends. They've known each other for an incredibly long time. And truth to tell, man, I dig this. I don't really know why. I don't know why it just hits me in this amazing way. But the idea that like Jim Gordon and Martha Wayne were really old friends and kind of like it's just what seems to be this gigantic, you know, quote unquote Bat family is all connected in some capacity, right? Traditional Batman villains actually started off as the friends of Bruce Wayne when he was a kid. They're friends still, despite not having actually become the villains that we're familiar with. Martha Wayne never died. She's the friend of Jim Gordon, right? Barbara Gordon, the daughter of Jim, is just a beat cop. I love this whole thing, right? It's amazing the way that this is done. It's incredible. And so they kind of talk about this, how the world has changed over the years since they were younger, right? The Jim Gordon sort of commiserates for a moment about when he found Bruce Wayne, that Bruce was actually in the Bat Sanctuary, right? When everything went down at the zoo, the bats almost seemed to attack him, and then that led to Jim Gordon finding him, hence Batman, basically bringing in the idea of a bat in order to instill fear in people. But the other part is they talk about like how much the world has changed, right? They're like, I mean, there was a time when, yeah, we were crazy. Like we thought we could change the world, failing to realize that if the world could be changed by a bunch of 20-year-olds, it already would have been changed, right? So again, kind of realizing the fact that the world is a very difficult place to change, right? To move around in any meaningful way. But more so than that, Martha talks about Bruce, because Jim asks, like, how's Bruce doing? And she's like, I don't really know, right? When he was a little kid, he would tell me everything, right? He would tell me everything that was going on in his life. I knew everything that was happening with him. Now, I don't. And what's so ironic about this is that this kind of stance of Bruce being very standoffish from his mom, keeping things hidden, is not that dissimilar from just general adolescence, right? I mean, most all of you guys know that we've all been through it, right? That we're not our mama's boy or daddy's boy anymore, or our mama's daughter or daddy's daughter anymore, or anything like that. Like, we're becoming adults, and we want all the benefits of adults with none of the drawbacks. And life doesn't work that way. But because we're coming into our own, and because we're trying to figure ourselves out, we don't know who we are. We don't know what we want, and we certainly don't know where we're going in the world. It's all a gigantic, confusing mess, hormones and so on and so forth. It's literally emotional chaos in its most pure form. And so as we go through this phase in our lives, like, we really kind of isolate ourselves from our parents in a lot of different ways. Not in bad ways, but we just don't open up to them the way that we used to, because some things we just want to keep close to the vest. It helps us feel in control. And so following that, right, initially, like, Bruce Wayne's friends, they were sitting outside, they were waiting on him, and he just kind of yelled at his mom and said, just tell him I don't want to see him, that kind of thing, right? These, again, are all kind of flashbacks to what was going on in his youth, but it's really designed to sort of illustrate the fact that even after his adolescence, after the death of his father, going into the modern era where he's much, much older, it's all still very much the same. He's still very much closed off. And so following this, what you do is you pick up with a poker game. Now, there isn't really much of a hidden meaning behind this poker game other than the fact that it's all these different guys playing together. I would imagine the hidden meaning behind this is to show the close connection among all these friends, which will make it even more tragic when they start becoming villains. God, it's gonna be like the ending of Fox and the Hound, right? Like, we'll always be friends forever, right? Like, it's gonna be crushingly devastating. But as you guys can imagine, Edward Nygma is the tech guy, right? This guy is incredibly good with technology. Harvey Dent, right, an aspiring lawyer and really an existing lawyer, is very well put in with, like, the whole criminal sphere, or really the legal sphere, the whole legal system and everything. And the list goes on and on and on. The only person that's not here is Catwoman, right? Selena Kyle. The last they heard from her, there was a postcard sent from Cairo. But at the end of the day, what Bruce does is he brings in one of the helmets of the party animals. And this is cool because he talks about how he's basically helping to clean up, City Hall and that kind of thing. And so that's how he was able to access this, right? Lying to his friends about being Batman, essentially, which really begs the question, will he tell them? And if he does, is it possible they never become the villains that we're familiar with? Instead, they all join the Bat family, right? There is no Dick Grayson, there is no Jason Todd, there is no, Barbara Gordon becoming Oracle or anything like that. Then instead, like, Edward Nygma is Oracle, right? And like Wayland becomes the Red Hood. I mean, how dope would that be? Oh my God, dude, now that I think about it, man, how dope would that be? Oh God, I really hope that happens. Son, I really hope that happens. But in effect, right, like, what we end up learning, at least from Bruce Wayne's perspective, is that this is how the party animals know where everybody is, and it's why they don't hit the same place twice. Because what ends up happening is that it creates a kind of communication network between each member of the party animals, but more so than that, it creates a kind of line, right? He says, a geographical information system. It maps shared targets into a private GPS network, assigns different values, meaning if one knew how to decode it, one could possibly get a bead on where the party animals were going to show up next. Now, this is why I say it can kind of go either way with regards to these guys joining the Bat family and being aides or becoming villains. Because as time has progressed, they've all gotten involved in Gotham in different capacities. So with someone like Oswald, right, who's here, that Batman asked the question, right? He's like, high-tech, heavily armored, the party animals must be moving in on everyone's territory. Ozzy, do you know anything about this? And ultimately, like, Oswald kind of feels like Batman's asking, like, I'm in an atypical line of work, right? I mean, why would I be involved in that kind of thing, And it's kind of like, but I mean, if I was, I would probably tell you that they're not really moving in on anything in particular, right? As far as I can tell, these guys are just out to wreck the city. The word is that Roman, right, that he kills everyone who meets and tries to make a deal. And that's it, which is the reason why the head of the party animals took out the Maroni and Falcone crime families, right? Like, they were dead and gone, right? They're out of the picture. And so at that point, the question kind of shifts over to Harvey Dent. What do you think's going on, right? Do you think this is potentially political, right? That is some kind of an attempt by way of like Jim Gordon or even like Mayor Hill to try to retake control or something along those lines? And the response of Harvey is he says that Jim Gordon was hurting before all of this chaos. It would basically be overkill to do all of this just to discredit Jim Gordon, literally and figuratively. And so he's like, my 2 cents. If this is political, it's about more than simply just power. There's something bigger going on here. And that's where Bruce asks, right? What's a bigger motivator than power? And that's where Harvey chimes in with this amazing statement where he's like, spoken like a true crime alley boy. Money, brother, the source, the chicken and the egg, both, right? If you have power, you have money, or if you have money, you have power. Which one comes first and which one matters more? It's really, really cool. And truth to tell, it's almost a little Edward Nygma, right? It's almost a little Riddler in terms of the ideology. And so that's where you continue with Harvey Dent's monologue, right? Where Batman throws down like 3 aces to beat Harvey Dent's 2 pair. And he's like, I mean, unless we're playing with jokers. And that's where Harvey says, jokers are never welcome here, Bruce. And he says, I never should have let you in on the pot. And look, I don't know if it has anything to do with the party animals, but from what I hear in the halls, Mayor Hill has been taking in a lot of capital, like a lot. This guy I know who works in his office, a young guy named Haiti, he says Hill is riding high on the new purse that he calls, quote unquote, his golden chest, right? Where's this money coming from? No one seems to know, and no one wants to rock the boat. Nobody wants to flip that coin over and see what's on the other side. And so Batman does, right? He literally goes into Mayor Hill's office and then basically accesses a file, right, that says Arc M. And Arc is what a golden chest is also known as, hence Arc M. And so when he opens the folder, he's immediately met by a video that comes directly from seemingly, right, the head of the party animals. And he's just like, so here's the thing, man, we need to sit down and have a conversation. But there's a little bit of a catch. I notify the entirety of the Gotham City Police Department, and all my guys are surrounding this building. So if you want to talk, that's great. I'm 100% down for it. The only thing you have to do is survive long enough to do it. And it's dope because Batman, this is the ending I was telling you guys about. And so Batman slides all the way down to the bottom just to be met by the arrival of Alfred. Now, he doesn't really take Alfred overly serious. We know that from the ending of the last video, or at least part of the last video, when he literally just snatched the gun out of Alfred's hands after overpowering him and then took it, right? And then turned it into like a non-lethal weapon. Which was kind of dope. But he does give Alfred a moment to speak, right? He's like, I've come to believe that we can actually help each other here. Give me 30 seconds, right? And so ultimately, Batman does. But he's like, we need to get out of here, man. Like, we have someplace safe. I've got a car out back unless you have a car that we can use. And Batman's like, you're standing in it. They're in the Batmobile, ladies and gents, but it's not just any Batmobile. The Batmobile is a bulldozer. It's amazing because he just goes plowing through the cops. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. I told you, Absolute Batman is phenomenal. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.